The sound came first. A low, percussive thunder tearing through the placid Sunday afternoon of Havenwood. 1432. The Harley-Davidson Fat Boy idled at a stop sign, its chrome glinting under a weak sun, the air around it shimmering with heat and exhaust. The man on the bike, known only as Ghost to his brothers, felt a tug on the thick leather of his vest. He ignored it. Another tug, more insistent this time. A small, desperate pull. He looked down. A boy, no older than 8, with wide, terrified eyes and a pale, drawn face, was staring up at him. The boy's knuckles were white where he gripped the worn patch sewn over Ghost's heart. A stylized iron raven. "Please," the boy whispered, his voice so thin it was almost lost in the engine's growl. "You have to help me." Ghost, whose real name was Elias Thorne, had a rule. Don't get involved. It was a rule forged over 38 years of seeing the world for what it was. He ran a hand over his shaved head, the motion weary. "Go home, kid. Bother someone else." The boy shook his head, a frantic, bird-like motion. He didn't let go. Instead, he pointed a trembling finger toward a house 2 doors down. It was a perfect colonial, white siding, black shutters, a lawn so green it looked painted. A man stood silhouetted in the bay window, watching. Even from the street, Elias could feel the coldness of his stare. It wasn't curiosity. It was ownership. The boy flinched, as if the gaze were a physical blow. "He's watching?" The boy breathed, a puff of panicked air. "Please." Elias felt a flicker of something uncomfortable, a dissonant note in the carefully constructed quiet of his life. But the light turned green. The world had rules, and his was to keep moving. He gently pried the small fingers from his vest. "I can't help you, kid." He twisted the throttle, and the bike surged forward, the boy's small, pleading face shrinking in his rearview mirror. He saw the man in the window turn away, a slow, satisfied motion. The image of the boy standing alone on the corner, looking smaller and more fragile than any child should, stayed with him for 3 blocks. At the 5th, he swore under his breath, the sound swallowed by the wind, and made a sharp, illegal U-turn, the tires screaming in protest. The quiet of his life had already been broken. The local police station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A fan wobbled overhead, stirring the thick air but providing no relief. Officer Miller, a man whose uniform seemed a size too tight, and whose face was permanently set in a mask of weary indifference, listened to Elias's story with a barely concealed yawn. He typed with 2 fingers, his gaze fixed on the monitor. "A boy," Miller repeated, his voice flat. "Says he's scared of his foster dad. You don't have a name for the kid?" Elias shook his head. He just pointed at the house. 214 Elm Street. Miller stopped typing. He leaned back, the chair groaning in protest. A slow smile spread across his face, not a pleasant one. 214? That's Alistair Finch's place. The name was spoken with a kind of reverence. "You know who Alistair Finch is?" Elias remained silent, his arms crossed over his chest. His leather vest felt hot and confining in the stuffy room. "He's a pillar of this community," Miller continued, his tone becoming condescending. "Sits on the town council. Donates more to the police benevolent fund than anyone. The man practically built the new wing on the library. And you're telling me you think he's hurting his foster kid because some boy on the street looked scared?" Elias's jaw tightened. The kid was terrified. "He begged me for help. Kids have active imaginations," Miller said, waving a dismissive hand. "They watch too much TV. Maybe he got a bad grade, was afraid he'd be grounded. We get these calls all the time." Crying wolf. He turned back to his computer. A clear signal the conversation was over. "We're not going to bother Mr. Finch over the word of a biker and a dramatic kid. I'll have a patrol car swing by the neighborhood, just to check. That's the best I can do." Elias stood there for a moment, the officer's dismissal hanging in the air like a physical barrier. He saw the system in that instant not as a mechanism for justice, but as a fortress, its walls built to protect its own. Alistair Finch was inside the fortress. The boy was not. He turned and walked out without another word, the glass door swinging shut behind him, the officer's patronizing gaze feeling like a weight on his back. He got on his bike, the engine turning over with a familiar roar, but the sound offered no comfort. He had done what a citizen was supposed to do. He had gone to the authorities, and the authorities had looked away. He drove past Elm Street on his way out of town. A police cruiser was parked 2 houses down from number 214. The officer inside was looking at his phone. In the bay window of the perfect White House, the silhouette was gone. Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had not helped the boy. He had only confirmed that no one would. The boy's name was Leo. He was 8 years and 4 months old. He had lived at 214 Elm Street for 11 months, the longest he had ever stayed in one place. His world was one of textures and silences. The cold, smooth gloss of the hardwood floors he had to polish every Saturday until he could see his distorted reflection in them. The starched stiffness of the white shirts Mr. Finch made him wear to dinner, the collar always itching his neck. The oppressive weight of the silence that filled the house, a silence so profound he could hear the hum of the refrigerator from 2 rooms away. Alistair Finch did not yell. He did not have to. His disapproval was a physical presence, a drop in the room's temperature. Cruelty was never overt. It was disguised as discipline, as character building. When Leo accidentally spilled a glass of milk, he did not get scolded. He simply found his dinner portion for the next 3 nights reduced by half, a lesson in conservation. When he tracked a small amount of mud onto the Persian runner in the hall, his favorite worn-out sneakers, the ones his mother had bought him, disappeared. We must learn the value of our possessions by understanding the consequences of carelessness, Mr. Finch had said, his voice calm and reasonable, as Leo stared at the empty space by the back door where his shoes used to be. The house was a museum of a life Leo was not allowed to touch. Every piece of furniture was an antique, every rug an heirloom. His designated space was a small, Spartan room at the back of the 2nd floor. 1 bed, 1 desk, 1 chair. His few toys, a handful of plastic soldiers and a beloved, one-eyed teddy bear named Patches, were confined to a single wooden box. Patches had been a gift from his mother before she got sick. He remembered her smell, like cinnamon and rain, and the way she would hum when she held him. Those memories were becoming faint, like a photograph left out in the sun. Mr. Finch had found him talking to the bear one evening. The next morning, Patches was gone. "You're too old for such things," was the only explanation. "It's time to grow up." Leo had spent an hour searching, his heart pounding, before finally giving up, a hollow ache settling deep in his chest. He learned to be invisible. He walked on the sides of hallways to avoid creaking floorboards. He learned to breathe more shallowly when Mr. Finch was in the room. He learned that the safest place was outside the house, where the air didn't feel so heavy, where he could pretend for a few hours that he was just a normal boy. But he always had to come back. The fear was a constant companion, a cold stone in his stomach. It wasn't the fear of a loud noise or a sudden blow. It was a slow, grinding fear of what might be taken away next, what new, quiet lesson he would be forced to learn. He saw the biker, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of something other than fear. The man was big, solid, a mountain of leather and denim. The roaring engine of his motorcycle was the opposite of the house's silence. It was loud and real and powerful. The iron raven on his vest looked fierce, protective. For a desperate, fleeting moment, Leo believed that this man, this stranger, could break the silence. When the biker had pried his fingers away and driven off, the spark died, and the cold stone in his stomach felt heavier than ever. He had returned to the house, the front door clicking shut behind him with a sound of finality, the scent of lemon polish and cold indifference welcoming him home. A week passed. The rain came, washing the streets of Havenwood clean. Elias tried to forget the boy. He worked in his garage, the scent of oil and metal a familiar comfort. He tore down a carburetor and rebuilt it with meticulous precision. His hands steady, his mind focused. But in the quiet moments, in the space between the clang of a wrench and the whir of a drill, he saw the boy's face. He felt the phantom tug on his vest. The system had failed. He knew it. But his own code, the one about not getting involved, was a hard one to break. It had kept him safe. It had kept him free. Then, on a Tuesday morning, he found it. Tucked under the strap of his saddlebag, protected from the morning dew by a small plastic baggie, was a piece of paper. A child's drawing. It was rendered in crayon, the lines shaky but deliberate. On one side of the page was a small stick figure with a downturned mouth, standing alone. On the other side was a large, dark house with blacked-out windows and a jagged, angry shape inside it. A monster of swirling red and black scribbles. In the sky above the boy, another figure was drawn. A man on a motorcycle with wings like a bird. A raven. Underneath, a single word was scrawled in blocky, uneven letters. Help. Elias stared at the drawing, the crude crayon lines conveying a depth of despair that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't a child's tantrum. This was a message in a bottle. A desperate flare sent up from a sinking ship. The fear was escalating. The boy was trying again, risking whatever consequences came with being discovered, because his situation was becoming more unbearable. Elias got in his truck, leaving the bike in the garage. He drove to Havenwood, parking a block away from Elm Street. He just watched. For 2 hours, he sat there, the drawing on the passenger seat beside him. At 15:10, he saw them. Mr. Finch was walking Leo home from the school bus stop. Finch had a hand placed firmly on the boy's shoulder. From a distance, it might have looked paternal. But Elias saw the tightness in the man's grip, the way Leo's shoulders were hunched, his steps small and hesitant. As they passed a rose bush, Leo reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against a petal. Finch's hand tightened, and he pulled the boy back sharply. In that brief moment, Leo's sleeve slid up, and Elias saw it. A dark, ugly bruise, a constellation of purples and blues, blooming on the boy's upper arm. Finch quickly pulled the sleeve down, but he had seen it. It was real. The drawing, the fear, the bruise. It was all real. Elias felt a surge of cold fury. He saw a neighbor, an elderly woman, watering her petunias. On impulse, he got out of his truck and walked toward her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he started, his voice calm. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly at his appearance. The tattoos on his arms, the grim set of his jaw. "I was just wondering about the family at 214, he said, nodding toward the house. The woman's friendly expression vanished. She dropped her gaze, turning her attention back to her flowers with sudden, intense focus. "I don't get involved in other people's business," she muttered, turning the hose away from him. "Good people in this town. We mind our own." She walked to the other side of her yard, her back to him. The message was clear. The community was silent, whether out of fear or a misplaced sense of propriety. The system was indifferent. The neighbors were blind. The helplessness was a closing fist, and Elias felt his own rules, his own code of non-involvement, cracking under the pressure. The boy was utterly, completely alone, and that was a thing Elias Thorne could no longer abide. The Roost, headquarters of the Iron Ravens Motorcycle Club, was an old, converted warehouse on the industrial edge of town. It smelled of worn leather, stale beer, and engine grease. It was a place built on loyalty, on a shared understanding of the world's harsh edges. Elias, known here only as Ghost, walked past the long bar and the pool tables to the back room, the one marked with a single unadorned word, chapter. Inside, 4 men sat around a heavy oak table. At its head was Marcus Forge Vance, the club president. He was a man in his late 50s with hands like cinder blocks and eyes that had seen more than most. He looked up as Ghost entered, his expression unreadable. "Ghost," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You look like you're carrying something heavy." Ghost didn't sit. He stood at the end of the table and placed the crayon drawing in the center. The men leaned in to look. Silence fell over the room. "His name is Leo," Ghost began, and he told them everything. The first meeting, the dismissive cop, the house, the bruise, the silent neighbor. He spoke in a low, steady voice, laying out the facts without emotion, the way a mechanic diagnoses a failing engine. When he finished, the silence returned, heavier this time. Forge picked up the drawing, his calloused thumb tracing the outline of the winged biker. He looked at Ghost, his gaze intense. "You're invoking the vow," he stated. It wasn't a question. The vow of the unheard. It was the club's oldest, most sacred code, a principle that went deeper than bylaws or patches. It was a promise, forged in the club's early days by veterans who had returned from war to a world that wouldn't listen, to protect those the system had failed. It was reserved for the helpless, the voiceless, the ones who had nowhere else to turn, with a specific, unbreakable addendum for children. Invoking it was not a small thing. It meant the full weight of the club, its resources, its members, its unyielding discipline would be brought to bear. It transformed individual anger into a singular, collective purpose. The cop called him a pillar of the community, Ghost said, his voice tight. The neighbor turned her back. The boy is 8 years old and he's drawing pictures of monsters in his house. There's no one else, Forge nodded slowly. He looked around the table at the other officers. At Rook, the club's intelligence officer, a wiry man who worked as a network administrator. At Hammer, the enforcer, a carpenter whose quiet demeanor belied his immense strength. At Doc, a former army medic who now ran his own ambulance service. Each man met his gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod. The decision was made. Forge turned back to Ghost. "The vow is invoked," he said, his voice resonating with ancient authority. The catalyst had been triggered. The quiet rage of one man had become the focused mission of 40. "Rook," Forge commanded. "I want to know everything about Alistair Finch. Finances, connections, history. Every skeleton in his closet. And I want to know the exact legal status of the boy." Leo, he then turned to Ghost. "Your point on this. But you will do nothing alone. You will follow procedure. Our procedure. This isn't a bar fight. It's a rescue. We will be disciplined. We will be lawful. And we will be seen." The switch had been flipped. The engine of the Iron Ravens, long dormant in this kind of fight, was beginning to turn. 6 o'clock. The calls began. A cascade of text messages and brief, coded phone calls rippled out from the roost. The messages were simple. Vow invoked. Stand by for mobilization. ETA 9 o'clock. There were no questions, only acknowledgments. Copy. Standing by. On my way. The mobilization of the Iron Ravens was a thing of quiet, practiced efficiency. It was a montage of working men dropping their tools and answering a higher call. In a garage across town, a man named Slate, a master mechanic, wiped his hands on a rag, told his customer the repair would have to wait, and pulled the cover off his gleaming road glide. In a high school classroom, Mr. Peterson, known to the club as Padre for his calm wisdom, finished his lecture on the Civil War, assigned his students silent reading, and walked out to the parking lot. In a downtown law office, a paralegal named Strings, for his skill with finding loopholes, logged out of his computer and sent a text to his boss, citing a family emergency. The preparation was methodical. It wasn't just about bikes. Hammer arrived at the roost with a truck, loading it with professional-grade video cameras, long-lens still cameras, and portable power banks. Rook sat in the back room, his fingers flying across a keyboard, his screen a cascade of data. "Finch's financials are clean, almost too clean," he reported to Forge. "He runs a holding company, major donor to political campaigns, both local and state. Sits on the board of the Regional Foster Care Review Committee. He's insulated." Forge absorbed the information, his expression grim. "He built his own fortress. I'm in the county database," Rook continued. "Leo's full name is Leo Carter. Mother deceased. Father unknown. He's been in the system for 3 years. 3 placements before Finch. All returned for behavioral issues. Finch's file is spotless. Glowing reviews. The information painted a bleak picture. A powerful man who had co-opted the very system meant to provide oversight. 8:15. Sarah Jenkins arrived. She was the club's lawyer, a sharp, fiercely intelligent woman in her 40s who had once been represented by the club's founding members in a domestic case decades ago. She owed them a debt she repaid with her formidable legal mind. She carried a leather briefcase and an air of absolute competence. Forge and Ghost briefed her, laying out the drawing, the photo of the bruised Ghost had managed to take from a distance, and Rook's data. She listened, her face impassive. The bruise and the drawing give us reasonable suspicion, but it's not enough to override a judge's deference to a man like Finch, she said, her tone clinical. A public wellness check is our best option. We need to create a situation where he can't hide, where his image is threatened. The pressure has to be public, documented, and irrefutable. 9:30. The engines started. Not with a roar, but with a low, synchronized rumble. 37 bikes. The head count was precise. Each man knew his role. They were not a mob. They were a disciplined escort, a moving wall of silent observation. They formed up in staggered lines, Ghost at the front, flanked by Forge. At the back of the column, Doc prepped his medical kit. They were not going to war. They were going to pull back a curtain, and they were bringing the light with them. The convoy moved out, a river of steel and leather flowing through the morning traffic, each rider a study in controlled power. Their destination, 214 Elm Street. Their timing was impeccable. Rook's research had revealed that Alistair Finch was hosting a Saturday charity luncheon in his garden for the town's elite. He was about to have some uninvited guests. The scene in the garden of 214 Elm Street was one of curated perfection. White linen tablecloths fluttered in a gentle breeze. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved among the guests, offering champagne and canapés. The mayor was there, laughing at something Alistair Finch had said. Officer Miller stood near the buffet table, looking pleased and important. It was a tableau of civic harmony, a celebration of the generosity of Havenwood's finest citizen. Then came the sound. It started as a faint, distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard. It grew steadily, a low-frequency rumble that caused champagne flutes to tremble. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. The sound became a deep, resonant thunder, the synchronized beat of dozens of V-twin engines. It wasn't aggressive or chaotic. It was orderly, measured, and inexorable. The first bike appeared at the end of the street, then another and another. A procession of them moving slowly, deliberately. They didn't roar up to the curb. They parked, one by one, in perfect legal alignment along both sides of the street, their engines cutting out in a staggered, echoing silence. The sudden quiet was more jarring than the noise had been. 40 men in black leather vests sat on their machines, unmoving. They didn't speak. They didn't gesture. They simply sat, their collective gaze fixed on the perfect White House. They formed a silent, immovable perimeter. Witnesses began to appear. Neighbors, drawn by the sound, peered from behind curtains. A woman paused her jogging, her phone held up, recording. The elderly woman who had dismissed Elias now stood on her porch, her hand over her mouth. The press arrived moments later, a local news van screeching to a halt at the end of the block, a cameraman and a reporter spilling out. Sarah Jenkins had made one more call. Alistair Finch's smile was frozen on his face. He strode to the edge of his lawn, his expression a mask of outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice attempting authority. "This is a private event. Officer Miller, remove these hooligans." Officer Miller puffed out his chest and started forward, but he stopped short as Sarah Jenkins stepped out from between two of the parked motorcycles. She held up a hand, and her voice, though quiet, carried with absolute clarity. "Officer Miller," she said, her tone sharp and professional. "I believe you'll want to stand down." She walked onto the lawn, her heels sinking slightly into the manicured grass, her presence a stark contrast to the garden party's frivolity. The bikers did not move. They were a silent jury, their presence amplifying the tension, turning a private garden into a public stage. Finch's composure began to fray at the edges. His power was derived from his reputation, from the carefully constructed walls of his influence. And 40 silent men and a television camera were aiming a wrecking ball at the foundation. The confrontation had begun, not with a shout, but with a profound, unnerving silence. Sarah Jenkins did not address Alastair Finch. Her focus was on the apparatus of the state, embodied by the flustered police officer. "Officer Daniel Miller," she said, her voice cutting through the tense air. "On Tuesday, at approximately 14:45, a citizen named Elias Thorne reported a credible concern for the welfare of a minor at this address. You dismissed his concern and failed to file a formal report, a violation of State Protocol 3B-17 regarding potential child endangerment." Miller's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Sarah pressed on, producing a document from her briefcase. "This is a court order for an immediate wellness check on the minor, Leo Carter, signed by Judge Amelia Vance of the State Superior Court 30 minutes ago. It was granted based on new evidence, including a sworn affidavit from Mr. Thorne, a preliminary psychological assessment of materials provided by the child, and photographic evidence of physical injury." She handed the document to Miller, who took it with a trembling hand. Finch stepped forward, his face a thundercloud of fury. "This is outrageous. An invasion of my privacy based on the lies of some degenerate biker." "Mr. Finch," Sarah said, turning to him for the first time, her eyes cold as ice, "your reputation is not a legal shield. You will comply with this court order, or you will be charged with obstruction of justice." The bikers' cameras were all pointed forward, their red recording lights blinking in unison. The news camera zoomed in on Finch's face, capturing the sweat beading on his upper lip. The mask was slipping. From the porch of the house next door, the elderly woman who had turned her back on Elias took a hesitant step forward. She began, her voice shaky. Everyone turned to look at her. Emboldened by the wall of silent protectors and the official presence of the lawyer, she found her voice. "I heard things," she said, louder now. "Crying. Night. I told myself it was nothing. I didn't want to cause trouble." A man from 2 houses down chimed in. "He's always alone, the boy. Always looks so sad. We all noticed. We just didn't say anything." The dam of communal silence, built of fear and deference, was breaking. One voice, then another, rose from the crowd of neighbors who had gathered. The whispers of a neighborhood were becoming a public testimony. Sarah Jenkins nodded toward the house. "We are going inside to see the boy." Now Finch, trapped and exposed, had no choice. He turned and walked stiffly toward his front door. Sarah and 2 bikers, Doc and Ghost, followed him. Inside, the house was just as Leo's fear had described it. Cold, immaculate, and silent. They found Leo in his room, sitting on his bed, his hands folded in his lap. He looked up, and when he saw Ghost, his eyes widened, first in fear, and then in dawning, unbelievable hope. "It's okay, Leo," Ghost said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "We're here to help." Doc knelt beside the boy, his manner gentle and reassuring. "Hey there, sport. I'm a doctor. Can I just take a look at your arm? The one that hurts?" Leo gave a small, hesitant nod. Doc carefully pushed up the boy's sleeve. The bruise was there, stark and brutal against his pale skin. But there were others. Faded yellow and green marks on his ribs, visible through his thin shirt. A small, healing cut behind his ear. Doc's hands were gentle, but his eyes were hard as steel. He took out a small camera, documenting every injury with clinical precision, his quiet clicks echoing in the silent room like hammer blows against Finch's crumbling facade. The truth was no longer a secret whispered by a frightened child. It was evidence. It was documented, and it was out in the open for the entire world to see. The unraveling was swift and public. As Doc finished his examination, Sarah Jenkins was already on the phone, not to the local dispatch, but to the state police barracks 2 counties over. She calmly and clearly reported an active child abuse situation being obstructed by a compromised local authority. While she was on the call, Finch, his face a mask of disbelief, tried to reassert his control. "This is my house. You have no right," he blustered, stepping toward Leo. Ghost moved, not with speed, but with an undeniable finality, placing himself between Finch and the boy. He didn't touch Finch. He simply stood there, a 230-pound wall of leather and resolve. Finch stopped cold. His physical authority was gone. His social authority was in ruins on the lawn outside. His legal authority was being dismantled by the woman on the phone. He was powerless. 20 minutes later, 2 state police cruisers arrived, their sirens silent but their lights flashing, cutting through the assembled crowd of bikers and neighbors. 2 troopers, professional and impassive, stepped out and conferred briefly with Sarah Jenkins. They reviewed her order and Doc's preliminary findings. One of the troopers then walked directly up to Alastair Finch. "Sir, you are under arrest for suspicion of child abuse and obstruction of justice." The words, spoken in a calm, procedural tone, were devastating. Finch stared, aghast. "You can't be serious. Do you know who I am?" The trooper did not react. He simply took Finch's arm and turned him around, cuffing his hands behind his back with a metallic click. The mayor and the other distinguished guests, who had been huddled on the far side of the lawn, began to quietly slip away, not wanting to be associated with the unfolding disaster. The news camera captured it all. The pillar of the community being led away in handcuffs, his face a mixture of rage and humiliation. The Iron Ravens did not cheer. They did not gloat. They sat on their bikes, a silent honor guard, their mission not yet complete. They stood watch as a compassionate-looking woman from the state's Child Protective Services, an agent Sarah had personally vetted and requested, arrived. She knelt and spoke to Leo in a soft voice, promising him he was safe, that he would not have to come back to this cold, silent house. Leo looked from the woman to Ghost. He walked over to the biker who had come back outside, and for a moment he just stood there. Then, he reached out and hugged Ghost's leg, burying his face in the thick denim. Ghost stood rigid for a second, unused to the contact, before his hand came to rest gently on the boy's small head. Justice had been delivered, not through violence or revenge, but through discipline, documentation, and the relentless application of the law. As the CPS agent led Leo to her car, the bikers, their purpose fulfilled, started their engines in the same synchronized order they had arrived. The thunder returned for a moment, a powerful, resonant roar that vibrated through the street, before they pulled away, one by one, melting back into the world as quietly as they had emerged from it. The resolution was not an end, but a beginning. Wrongs were being rectified, dignity was being restored, and on Elm Street, in front of a perfect White House that now looked like a crime scene, the silence had finally, irrevocably been broken. The legacy of that Saturday on Elm Street began not with a thunderous roar, but with a quiet click. It was the sound of a new file being opened in Sarah Jenkins' office, a pro bono case titled The People v. Alastair Finch. The trial was swift. Faced with the meticulously documented evidence, the testimony of Doc, the damning psychological analysis of Leo's drawings, and the chorus of neighbors who finally spoke up, Finch's expensive legal team could do little. The jury, comprised of citizens from a neighboring county, saw not a pillar of the community but a methodical abuser hiding in plain sight. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to a term that ensured he would never again be in a position of power over a child. The ripple effects spread through Havenwood like a groundswell. Officer Miller was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending a full internal affairs investigation that the state police had initiated at Sarah's formal request. His career in law enforcement was over. The stain of his willful negligence was too deep to wash away. The town council, embarrassed and exposed, launched a complete overhaul of its oversight committees, particularly the Foster Care Review Board on which Finch had sat. The process for vetting and monitoring foster placements was rewritten, with new, stricter protocols and mandatory, unscheduled wellness checks. The elderly neighbor who had been the first to speak up was nominated and appointed as a citizen advocate on the new board, her voice now a permanent part of the system she had once feared. The Iron Ravens did not seek credit. They faded back into their roles as mechanics, teachers, and administrators. But something within the club had shifted. The vow of the unheard had been more than a clause in their bylaws. It had been a reaffirmation of their core identity. A month after the trial, Forge called a chapter meeting. In the center of the oak table, he placed a stack of letters, dozens of them, from people in Havenwood and surrounding towns. They were letters of thanks, but they were also letters of desperation. Other stories of other children, other voiceless victims ignored by the system. The vow wasn't for one boy, Forge said, his voice heavy. It was for all of them. That night, they voted to establish the vow fund. Each member pledged a percentage of their monthly income to create a legal aid and investigative resource, managed by Sarah Jenkins, dedicated solely to cases of suspected child endangerment that official channels had dismissed. It was a formalization of their promise, turning a code of honor into an enduring institution. Their symbol, the Iron Raven, began to take on a new meaning in the region. The rumble of a Harley was no longer just the sound of rebellion. For a growing number of people, it was the sound of potential salvation, a reminder that there were those who listened when no one else would. Months later, Elias Thorne, Ghost, was riding on a long, open highway, the sun warm on his back. Tucked into a protective sleeve inside his vest, right next to the worn raven patch, was a new drawing. It was from Leo. The picture showed a small boy with a wide smile, holding hands with a big, burly biker. Above them, a bright yellow sun shone down, its rays touching both of them. Leo was with a new family now, a kind couple in the next state, a place with a noisy dog and a yard full of laughter. He was healing. Elias rode past a park. He saw a father pushing his daughter on a swing, her laughter carrying on the wind. He felt the weight of the vow not as a burden, but as an anchor. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a man riding toward a purpose. The roar of his engine was a promise that in the quiet, forgotten corners of the world, where children whispered for help, someone would hear, someone would answer. The system had been reformed, but more than that, a community's faith had been restored, not in institutions, but in the profound, transformative power of collective courage and lawful, disciplined action. The legacy was not one of vengeance, but of vigilance. And it was just beginning.